Therefore, it just seems to me interesting that this case of the woman taken in adultery involves also Jesus and the dust on the temple floor. In the 5th chapter of Numbers, there's this very strange law. It says in verse 11, Numbers 5:11, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, If any man's wife goes astray and behaves unfaithfully toward him, and a man lies with her carnally, and it is hidden from the eyes of her husband, and it is concealed that she has defiled herself, and there is no witness against her, nor was she caught. If the spirit of jealousy comes upon him, and he becomes jealous of his wife, who has defiled herself, or if the spirit of jealousy comes upon him and he becomes jealous of his wife, although she has not defiled herself," these are the two possibilities. Either he's feeling jealous of his wife and she either has or has not done something wrong. It obviously makes it clear that the spirit of jealousy coming upon a man is not like a revelation from God necessarily, that she's defiled herself, because both possibilities. The spirit of jealousy may come upon him and she is guilty, or the spirit of jealousy may come upon him and she's not guilty. Those are the two possibilities. How do you decide? He can't just on a hunch prosecute his wife for adultery. And the setup of the situation is such that no one has caught her. There's no witnesses. And so the only thing that causes her not to get away with it is that the spirit of jealousy has come upon her husband. He feels that she's done this. He has a sense that she has. But that sense is not always reliable. I've told some of you before that, and this is a strange, as Paul Harvey used to say, this is a strange. My first wife, as some of you know, was unfaithful a few times before she ran off and divorced me. But one of the men that she was with was a man that I barely knew, and I didn't even know she knew him. He was a young man who came to my Bible studies. I was teaching Bible studies in the home where we lived, in our home. And there were like 30 people or so that would come a couple times a week to our Bible studies there. And there was this young man who was there. I don't even remember, his name was, I think, Bob, but I don't remember anything else about him. I don't even think I knew his last name. And he was not a man I had conversations with. I had nothing against him. I had seen him a few times in the crowd. I had never once seen my wife talk to him. I had never had any idea if she'd even met him. But one night I had a dream that she was having an affair with him. And when I woke up, it's like the spirit of jealousy had come up. It's almost like I just sensed it was true. And I confronted her, asked her, and she confessed it was true. She was having an affair with him. Which is the most bizarre thing, because I might have had reason to suspect that she would be unfaithful in some kind of circumstance, because her background was not real pure and she was not really walking with strong with the Lord at that particular point. But for me to suspect that she would be with him, it's not like he was a good-looking guy, so I was always afraid, in my subconscious, I thought, well, maybe he might win my wife's heart. He wasn't particularly the kind of guy that I would even imagine she'd be attracted to. I had nothing in my mind that would have ever connected those things. And I had this dream, and it turned out it was true. And it was just strange. It was like the spirit of jealousy, in this case, was like a revelation from God. The problem is, men sometimes have dreams or suspicions about their wives' unfaithfulness, and they're not true. They're just lies of the devil. The spirit of jealousy may be from God, or it may be from the devil. And you can't just say, well, I just feel strongly that you've been unfaithful, therefore I'm going to punish you as an unfaithful wife. That was not permitted. Now, in some societies that would be permitted, because a man had such total control over his wife, that like over his slaves or his children, he could abuse them terribly, and just because he wanted to. That was not okay in Israel. She could not be punished for adultery just because he was quite sure she had done something wrong and he had a hunch about it. It had to be determined whether she was innocent or not. And so there was this strange ordeal. There's nothing else like it in the whole Bible, the whole law. Many people think it's very barbarous I think they misunderstand it. It says, if that's the case, this man has the spirit of jealousy. Verse 15, then the man shall bring his wife to the priest. He shall bring the offering required for her, 1/10 of an ephah of barley meal. He shall pour no oil on it and put no frankincense on it. This is not a sweet thing. This is not a pretty thing. This is an ugly thing. Because it is a grain offering for jealousy, an offering for remembering, for bringing iniquity to remembrance. And the priest shall bring her near and set her before the Lord. The priest shall take holy water in an earthen vessel and take some of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle and put it into the water. Then the priest shall stand the woman before the Lord, uncover the woman's head, and put the offering of remembrance in her hands, which is the grain offering of jealousy. And the priest shall have in his hand the bitter water that brings a curse. And the priest shall put her under oath and say to the woman, if no man has lain with you, and if you have not gone astray to uncleanness while under your husband's authority, be free from this bitter water that brings the curse. But if you have gone astray while under your husband's authority, and if you have defiled yourself and some man other than your husband has lain with you, then the priest shall put the woman under the oath of the curse, and he shall say to the woman, the Lord make you a curse and an oath among your people, when the Lord makes your thigh to rot and your belly to swell. And may this water that causes the curse go into your stomach and make your belly swell and your thigh rot. Then the woman shall say, amen, so be it. So she's still protesting her innocence here. And the priest shall, of course she would, might as well, and she's going to be put to death if she's guilty. Might as well protest innocence as long as you can. But then the priest shall write these curses in a book, and he shall scrape them off into the bitter water. Now what goes into this water? Dust from the tabernacle floor and writing the words of the curse. And then he shall make the woman drink the bitter water that brings the curse, and the water that brings the curse shall enter her to become bitter. Then the priest shall take the grain offering of jealousy from the woman's hand, etc., etc. And verse 27, and when he has made her drink the water, it shall be, if she has defiled herself and behaved unfaithfully toward her husband, that the water that brings the curse will enter her and become bitter, and her belly will swell, her thigh will rot, and the woman will become a curse among her people. But if the woman has not defiled herself and is clean, then she shall be free and may conceive children, and so forth. This is the law of jealousy. When a wife, while under her husband's authority, goes astray and defiles herself. Now, I don't know, it's hard for me to make a tight connection. But it's just rather interesting to me that the ordeal of jealousy is about adultery, about the jealousy of a husband. It has to do with the dust on the floor of the tabernacle, and a writing of the curse. Also, the dust and the writing of the curse are put together into this water, which the woman drinks. Now, by the way, a lot of explanations, well not a lot, but several, more than one, have been given as to this strange custom. Some think it's a psychosomatic thing. This is a way of the woman who's concealing her guilt, her conscience, because she's superstitious and not all that, sophisticated. She thinks that this is going to work. And so if she really is guilty, her conscience is bugging her, and so these symptoms actually occur when she drinks the water. There's no magic in the water. Of course, it's just something that's psychological. But if she's innocent, of course, she knows she's innocent. Her conscience is bothered. She drinks the water. There's no issue there. I've had a debate online at our Bible forum with one man about this passage more than once. He doesn't believe that he's a Christian, but he doesn't believe that everything in the law of Moses is really from God. I think some of it was Moses' own invention, and he thought this was a barbaric thing. And he felt that there was something in the dust of the tabernacle floor that would cause these symptoms, and that this was sort of like those witch ordeals. Tie a rock around the witch's ankle, throw in the ocean, or in the lake. If she sinks, she's guilty. If she's innocent, she floats, or something like that. We hear those kinds of stories about how in the Salem witch trials, allegedly, they had these very unfair ways of testing a woman's innocence, If she sinks, she was guilty. Oh, well, good. If she's innocent, she floats. So in any case, if the rock pulls her to the bottom as one would expect it to do in every case. It proved she deserved it. And this guy was saying, this is a way that a guy who doesn't trust his wife can get rid of her. And this is just a law that was sort of serving the interests of the husband to get rid of a wife that he couldn't trust anymore. And that he, of course, this man was saying this, of course, if you drink the water that has this defilement in it from the temple floor, it's got some kind of virus or some kind of bacterium or something that's going to cause these symptoms. I wrote to him and said, what sickness do you know of that has these precise symptoms? The swelling belly and the thigh rotting. Now, there might be any number of gastronomical problems that cause the belly to swell, but the thigh rotting, I'm not aware of any particular bacterium that causes those symptoms. Furthermore, how would Moses be sure that those bacteria would be in that particular place? Especially in view of the fact that the tabernacle floor is one place to be cleaner than any other place because people were not allowed to walk with shoes on in it, and they had to take their shoes off and it would be kept rather clean. How could Moses be sure that there's going to be this particular kind of organism in the dust that would cause this thing? It just doesn't make sense to me. As far as I'm concerned, it looks to me like this is something where God himself would bear witness against the woman if she's lying. If she's cheated on her husband and she's lying about it, God will bring her guilt to light to vindicate the husband whose wife has been cheating on him. But when we come to the story of the woman taken in adultery, here we have a case of a woman taken in adultery, though there were witnesses. Unlike the case of the ordeal of jealousy, where it specifies there were no witnesses, here's a woman who was witnessed in the act. And therefore, we're not following the ordeal of jealousy, but some elements of it almost seem to be alluded to. Maybe because there's another jealousy and another adultery that is hinted at. Jesus certainly believed that Israel was apostate at this time, and that the leaders of Israel were themselves apostate. And everywhere in the Old Testament, when Israel was apostate, especially when they worshipped other gods, they were accused of being a harlot. They were accused of being committing spiritual adultery. Isaiah used the term, Jeremiah used the term a lot, Hosea used the term. This is something that was not uncommon. Ezekiel had a couple of chapters, 16 and 23, that were very graphic about how Israel was an adulteress when they worshipped other gods. When they were not faithful to their God, who was their husband, and they broke covenant, that they were guilty of adultery. And that may be, there may be some subtext of that in Jesus' actions. He calls attention first to the dust on the temple floor. He may have even written down the curse. We don't know what he wrote. He wrote something. But whatever would be written in the ordeal of jealousy wouldn't be retained. It would be scraped off. Whatever they wrote it on, they'd scrape it off into the water the woman would drink. And what Jesus wrote was not retained permanently either. It's the most impermanent medium of all possible mediums. Unless you're going to write on the steam on your bathroom mirror, I guess that's fairly impermanent too. But when you're writing on the dust on the floor, that's not going to last long. You know, the only thing Jesus ever wrote, wouldn't you love to have the writings of Jesus himself? And yet, he wrote one time that we know of, and it was not preserved. But I wouldn't be surprised if whatever he wrote was somehow related to this Numbers chapter 5 thing. And when he turned to the leaders, said, if you're not guilty of this sin, you cast the first stone. In other words, he's suggesting that they may be guilty of adultery of another sort. They haven't been caught. But they have come to the temple, they've come to the high priest Jesus, and he is, messing with the dust on the floor. He's writing something down. It may be that what he wrote was the curse of Numbers chapter 5 of adulterous woman, or maybe even the curse of Deuteronomy chapter 28, where God said that if you, Israel, do not keep my covenant, then all these curses will come upon you. He couldn't have written the whole chapter, it's too long. But the point is, he may have worked at it. He sat down and did it a couple of times. He may not have finished the chapter before they had all left. But the point is, I think, though I'm not sure, that there's some kind of intended connection, just because of the coincidental points I'm mentioning. Jesus may have been acting as the priest in the case of the ordeal of jealousy, and these Jewish leaders were the ones on trial. And they got out of there before their belly would swell and their thigh would rot. I don't know that that would have actually happened to them. But the point is that they realized that they were the ones on trial. They were the ones convicted. They were convicted in their own conscience, and they didn't want to wait around to be sentenced, I have a feeling, because the older they were, the wiser they were. None of them were very wise, but the older men are wiser. The young men were foolish enough not to catch it, until they saw that all the older guys had left. And they thought, oh, guess I better go too, you know? They must see something I'm not seeing. The young fools didn't see it as quickly as the old fools did, but the point here is that Jesus seems to have struck a nerve, and maybe by appeal to Moses. See, they were appealing to Moses. They were saying, Moses said she should be stoned. What do you say? Maybe Jesus was in some way appealing to Moses too, to Numbers chapter 5, in a way that takes the heat off the woman in this case and puts it on them. They too may be guilty of adultery, spiritual adultery. I don't know. I'd like to see someone who's smarter than me put that together better than I can, but I've never heard anybody make the connection, so I just don't know. Maybe it's not there. Now, his statement, let him that is without sin be the first to cast a stone at him. That certainly is applicable, but to what? Of course, many times, the same people who aren't Christians and who like to quote Matthew 7:1, judge not that you be not judged. They also like to quote this verse. This is their second favorite verse in the Bible. Let him that is without sin be the first to cast a stone. Well, obviously Jesus was not saying that a person has to be absolutely sinless in order to make judgments about sinful behavior. As I said, the police force, the magistrates, the judges, the criminal justice system, they couldn't operate at all if that was supposed to be a rule. Just you have to be flawless and perfect before you can judge. When Jesus said, judge not that you be not judged, he explained what he meant in the verses immediately following, where he said, if your brother has a speck in the eye, and you've got a beam in your own eye, then don't try to remove the speck from your brother's eye until you first remove the beam from your eye. Then you can see clearly, he said, to remove the speck. Jesus did not say it's wrong to judge. He said it's wrong to judge someone if you're as guilty as they are, or even worse. If you are guilty of this sin, you shouldn't be casting stones. Someone else more qualified than you should step in, because you are a hypocrite, he says. You hypocrite, first get the beam out of your own eye. This is in Matthew 7. And then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. When people say, get the beam out of your own eye, brother, often what they're saying is, don't point to my sin. No one has any right to tell me I'm doing the wrong thing. Well, everybody has the right to tell you you're doing the wrong thing if you're doing the wrong thing. Anyone has the right to tell you so. They're doing you a favor. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. The person who confronts you when you're in the wrong is doing you a favor. The thing is, if they are being critical of you and they're doing the same thing, or even worse, they have a beam in their eye and you only have a speck, well then they're rather hypocritical in doing it. And the person who makes a career of finding fault with other people had better make sure that they aren't guilty of something of the same sort or worse. And that would be the position Jesus is taking here. He's not saying you have to be completely without sin before you can, judge or correct someone's misbehavior. But you're awfully hypocritical if you try to do that when you're just as guilty as they are and you're ignoring your own breach of the law. And you're allowing a beam to remain in your eye. But notice Jesus said if you get the beam out of your eye, then you can remove the speck from your brother's eye. He's made it very clear. Removing a speck from your brother's eye is a positive thing. A little painful at times. It's hard to get something out of your eye painlessly, but the point is, you don't want it to stay in there either. The man who has a speck in his eye wants it out. And a person who's got a flaw in their life, if they care about their relationship with God, they want that flaw cleansed. They want that flaw removed. But they're less likely to be receiving correction from somebody that they can see has the same flaw, only worse. And now, when Jesus says, let him that is without sin be the first to cast stone at her, notice he did not cancel the Mosaic law. If anything, he seems to have supported it. His words can be understood to mean, yeah, Moses was right. She should be stoned. Anyone here qualified to do it? She has done something worthy of death, but you aren't worthy to be the executioners because you're no better than she is. Jesus didn't deny that adultery was a capital offense. He just said these people were mighty hypocritical if they were going to be the ones to carry out the execution. And Jesus, who could have done it, didn't want to, didn't care to. He was the one without sin. And therefore, he was the one who was qualified to cast the first stone. And yet, because he was without sin, he was also the only one qualified to atone for her sin and to not cast the first stone. He was qualified to do whichever needed to be done. And he decided, I won't condemn you. Go and sin no more. Now, his statement is very balanced. He said, you have been sinning. This is a sin. You must not do that anymore. You have to stop. You have to repent. But I'm not going to condemn you. Now, was she repentant? Is that why he didn't condemn her? Well, I don't know. Good chance that she was. We don't know. She was probably broken and humbled and ashamed and so forth. Whether there was true repentance, none of us know. We don't have any reference to her state of mind. But Jesus, knowing what her state of mind was, felt he could give her another chance. He said, I'm the only one here without sin. Now, of course, it's a good thing Mary wasn't there, because she might have thrown a stone, because according to Roman Catholics, she's without sin. But she wasn't there that day. So the woman had no danger from anyone except Jesus wanting to cast stones at her, and he wasn't interested. And so he said that. Now, we, of course, face sin in our culture, in our lives, in the church, in our families, and so forth. And it's essential that we represent Jesus' attitude about sin. And his attitude was not tolerant. He said, don't do it. That's a command. Don't do that anymore. That's not tolerance. He was not lenient. There's a difference between being lenient and being merciful. There's a difference between tolerance and grace. Because grace only exists where there is the acknowledgement that there is something to forgive. Something has been done that is wrong, that's not okay. You never have to bring mercy into the picture, or grace, unless something has been done that isn't okay. But lenience is sort of like acting like everything is okay. A lenient parent is one who doesn't really make any rules or doesn't enforce the rules, and basically the kid can do whatever they want, and the parent doesn't ever confront them. The parent doesn't ever say that's wrong. They act like everything's okay. God doesn't act like everything's okay. He says, that's wrong. You have to stop that. That's not okay. He's not lenient. He's not tolerant. But he's gracious. And grace is saying, there is nothing okay about what you did, but I'm going to forgive you for that. Not because the act is forgivable, but because I'm forgiving. Not because something you did can somehow lay claim on innocence and immunity. You can't. But I choose to be gracious, and that is my prerogative. I don't approve, and I do not say you have permission to do what you did. But I can say, I won't condemn you. I could, because I have not committed that sin. So I could condemn you, Jesus says. But I won't. I don't. Now, of course, when it comes to us dealing with sinners, in many cases we have not committed the same sins of the people that we're condemning. Most of us are not quite so dull as to, although some may be. I have certainly seen people who are, but But most of us are not so dull as to be aware in our own conscience that we're doing some heinous crime and go out and condemn someone else. But maybe I shouldn't say that, because that happens more often than it should. I think of Jimmy Swaggart, who before he was caught in his sins was very vehement in his preaching against another preacher on television who was compromised. And, you know, he was very intolerant, very condemning of this other preacher. And then, lo and behold, it seems like it wasn't weeks before his own sins were manifested. He was guilty of the same thing. So maybe people do that more than I think. To me, I know what my sins are, and I could never even for a moment feel self-righteous around somebody who's doing the same thing I do and feel like I can condemn them. But I guess some people are able to do that. But even if we're not, let's say you're condemning someone who got an abortion and you've never had one. You're condemning a homosexual because you're not a homosexual. You're condemning an adulterer, but you're not an adulterer. And therefore you don't have the beam in your eye. And therefore you feel justified in condemning them. Well, condemning isn't Jesus' stock and trade. He didn't come to condemn the world. He came that the world through him might be saved, it says in John chapter 3. Jesus, the Son of Man, did not come to condemn the world. That's not what he's interested in doing. If he wanted to do that, he could have just stayed home in heaven. Because the world was already condemned. He didn't have to do a thing. He could just wait for everyone to live out their life and die and go to hell. There's no need for Jesus to come and bring condemnation. He came to not condemn the world. He came to forgive the world. God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, not counting their sins against them. It says in 2 Corinthians 5. Jesus was not counting the world's sins against them when he came. You see, the spirit of Jesus and the spirit of religion are opposite. The scribes and Pharisees are an excellent example in this story of the spirit of religion. They're religionists. And religion condemns. Christ does not condemn. Christ may, in some cases, not be able to completely redeem somebody who refuses to believe, who refuses to repent. He may not be able to save them from the condemnation that they're already in, but he doesn't come to bring condemnation. And yet sometimes I've heard people, some preachers talk as if, if Jesus were here, he'd go into the homosexual bars and he'd take a whip and drive them all out. Would he? He never did that in his town. He never went into the brothels and drove out all the prostitutes. He never went into the tax collecting booths and drove out all the tax collectors. He drove people out of the temple who were defiling his father's house. That's a different story. Jesus didn't go and clean up society. He cleaned up his father's house. That corresponds to the church. If Jesus was here, he might take a whip to the church. But he's not going to go out to the unbelievers and take a whip to them. He never did anything even remotely like that. In fact, if you read of all the denunciations that come out of Jesus' mouth in the Bible, they're all directed to the religious people. It's always, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. We never have Jesus standing up and preaching, woe unto you prostitutes, woe unto you sinners, woe unto you tax collectors or whatever. It just never happened. And if it did, it's not likely that all these tax collectors and sinners would be drawn to him so much. They didn't need him to condemn them. They were condemned already and they knew it. They needed someone to tell them, I don't condemn you, but you need to stop. You need to stop sinning. Don't do that anymore. But I'm not here to condemn you for what you've done. And that is not what the world feels from Christians right now. That is what they felt from Jesus. And Christians have to be careful, need to make sure that the world isn't looking at us the way that Jesus looked at the scribes and Pharisees. Because the spirit of religion is to condemn. Because the spirit of religion is really self-righteousness. The spirit of Christ is humility. He washed the dirt off of his disciples' feet. And to clean people up, to wash people's feet, to clean them up, is really what he was interested in doing. The sinners knew they were sinners. They didn't need him to rub it in their faces. They knew it. What they needed to know is if there was any hope for them. if there's any way God could possibly have them back, if there's any way to be reconciled to God, the woman at the well, the cry of her heart was, where can I meet with God? Where can I worship God? I want to know, but I'm confused because the Jews say here and the Samaritans say here. I've got problems. I've got sin in my life. But here's a prophet. Thank God. A man has come who can solve this dilemma. Which is the right place to worship God? And Jesus would never have given her a straight answer if she wasn't honest. I mean, he never gave straight answers to the Pharisees if they weren't being honest. He wouldn't give her a straight answer if she was dodging, her moral culpability. Her issue was, I have been a sinner. I've had a broken life. And I know that our religion requires us to offer sacrifices. The problem is, our religion says if you offer the sacrifice in the wrong place, God won't accept it. And now I've got a problem because you people say that's the right place, and my people say this is the right place, and I just don't know. But you're a prophet, and you can solve this for me. Her desire was not to have Jesus come and condemn her for her sin. And it's amazing how many Christians read that and think that's exactly what he's doing. Oh, he's put the finger on her. Oh, you're a sinner. You're living with a man, not your husband. There's no reason to believe Jesus had any of that tone. Jesus didn't come to see a smoking flax and put it out, or to break a bruised reed. That's the opposite of his manner. If there's a bruised reed, he'd do his best to repair it, heal it. If a flaxen wick was smoldering because it was just about to go out, he'd more likely reignite it. He wouldn't snuff it out. That's what Christians often do, because they think that that's what Jesus would do, and they don't apparently think clearly about what they read. Jesus' attitude is always this: I don't condemn you, but don't do it anymore. That's not lenience, that's not tolerance, that's intolerance of sin, but grace. It's uncompromising grace. You've broken the law is true, the law is good, you've broken a pure law, you're guilty, but you already know that. What I'm here to tell you is that I don't condemn you. That there is grace. And that's the message that Jesus had to her. That's the message that we have for the world, but that's not the message they're getting. I think of, if Jesus came here right now and, was in that part of town where there's a lot of gay bars or whatever, it's amazing how many Christians think he'd go in there and start denouncing and start turning things over and so forth. That doesn't look like the Jesus in the Bible. The Jesus in the Bible would go in there and eat with them. He'd go in there and call them to repentance the way that a doctor visits a sick person. A doctor doesn't go to a sick person to finish him off. They're sick, so I'm going to go, I'm the executioner. No, I'm the physician. I'm on their side. Jesus is on the side of people. He's on the side of sinners, because everyone is sinners. And he came here because he was on our side, not against us. Religion is against us. Jesus is for us. And if people aren't getting that impression from us, then they're not seeing Jesus. They're seeing something else, traditional Christianity or something. I believe if Jesus was here, the gays would be drawn to him as somebody who seemed like maybe he had the answer to their brokenness. But they're not drawn to us. To them, we're just a rival political special interest group. We're a voting bloc that always votes against them. We're their enemies. And someone says, what do you think we're supposed to do? Befriend them? I mean, we can't encourage them. The gay agenda is trying to destroy our country. True. And what's going to stop them? Politics? Laws? Do you think that you can make a law against being a homosexual and those people who are driven by that sin are going to just say, oh, okay, it's illegal, I guess I'm going to change now? How? The law can't change anybody. The best laws in the world were given to Israel. It didn't make them good. Laws can't change you. Grace changes you. And the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. And that's what the church is supposed to be bringing to sinners, is grace and truth. Truth, the truth is that you must stop sinning. The grace, I don't condemn you. I'm not here to to create greater alienation between you and me or between you and God. I'm here to resolve that alienation that is obvious already and that you're already probably very much aware of. And therefore, I'm not here to talk to you about your sin. I'm here to talk to you about salvation from sin. Many people who teach on evangelism say the first thing you have to do when you evangelize someone is point out all the sins they've committed. Go through the 10 Commandments and show them that they've broken every one of them. Heap the law and condemnation on them. Then they'll know they need a remedy. Then they'll know they're sick and they'll be interested in the medicine. You have to give them the bad news before you give them the good news. I don't find it. I don't find Jesus going to them and giving them the bad news. The only bad news he had was for the scribes and Pharisees because they were religious and hypocritical. We never read of any bad news to the prostitutes and the tax collectors. There was some, but they already knew it. Jesus didn't have to tell them about that. They didn't think they were good people. He didn't have to point out to them all the times they'd broken the law. We love to do that because it's so self-righteous. Because I'm not breaking those laws. It puts me in a position of power, of authority and superiority over them. That's not... Jesus came and he was in the form of God, but he emptied himself and made himself in the form of a servant. And very unthreatening to sinners, very threatening to religious people. And you know what? Whether it's Jewish religion or Christian religion or Hindu religion or Muslim religion or any religion, religion is religion. It condemns people. Jesus didn't start a religion, he started a family. And he called the alienated children to come back and be reconciled to God, who is like the prodigal's father, eager to forgive, eager to embrace, eager to run out and meet them at the first indication that they were coming back, that they wanted to come home. That's what Jesus came to do. And religion does the opposite. It alienates, it condemns. And this contrast between Jesus and the scribes and Pharisees is a contrast in paradigms. One view of God versus another. One view of God is that God's an angry, legalistic, vengeful, punishing God. And he, you better not step out of line, you better dot every I and cross every T properly, or else he's got a short fuse. He's a very angry God. And you're a sinner in the hands of the angry God. And he delights to destroy you. He's dangling you like a loathsome creature over a flame. He hates you with an unutterable hatred. That's what, of course, Jonathan Edwards tells sinners. I don't know which Bible he read, because I haven't read anything like that about God in our Bible. But that is the attitude of many Christians. And it's not the attitude of Jesus. It's just the opposite. Okay, so we can't get any further in this chapter tonight. We've run out of time. But I didn't expect to, by the way, so I'm not disappointed. Usually I disappoint myself, because I usually expect to get further than I get. But this time I didn't expect to get any further, so we'll just stop there.